We usually have our meetings on the second Monday of each month from 12 to 1:30. The meetings are often held, or have been always held, at the Urban League. And we were planning to have this meeting at the Urban League, and then sort of started seeing like the numbers of the events or the folks being invited and saying that they were attending increase. We thought it would be a good idea to change the location to this location, so I really appreciate Mount Zion's Church to open the space for us. So thank you very much. A little bit about Communities United. I don't know how many years, like over a decade, that this meeting's been held and in attendance, and we usually discuss issues pertaining LGBTQ folks, people of color, and other unrepresented groups. And it's usually issues regarding social justice and racial justice as well. Anything from transportation to the current state of racial disparities in our county. We usually have about 30 to 40 folks attend regularly our meetings. And this is obviously sort of a very special meeting. I think to also, I just wanted folks to be a little bit patient that some people heard the last minute the location change. So there'll probably be people coming in as we start, but I wanted to get us to start promptly. This is a very different meeting than what we have, and some folks will start calling it panel, and I had like a lot of hesitations with the panel, because the intention of Communities United is really to have a mutual and exchange conversation with the community and the folks, the guests invited. And obviously, for many reasons, we're not going to be able to have that today, so I was proposing to have a combination of me prompting some questions to both of our guests, and then sorting through some of the themes of questions that you may have, and then if we have some time, we may have a couple people have questions. But we're in a shorter time, and then I'll make sure we end our meeting at 1:30. But at the very least, this is an opportunity for you to meet the guests and also get their information, their contact information. You can follow up another conversation if you wish to do so. The other thing that is really important is that while we're in this space, in Communities United space, which will be until 1:30, the conversation will be specifically about racial justice and social justice. Any other theme or any other conversation you wish to have, you feel free to do so after 1:30. So I just really value this time, and I want to make sure that that's set. So with that, I would like to introduce our guests. So thank you so much, Reverend Cooper and Adams. And Amber, would you like to start by just sharing a little bit about your work and what you do and who you are?
Sure. So I was born and raised in Milwaukee. I've been in Madison since 2003, and I've stayed in Madison ever since. I came into social justice work and community organizing work, most of which based on my own lived experience. So I grew up in a poor inner city, a single mother. My father's been incarcerated nearly as many years as I've been alive. My grandparents are from the South, grew up in the Jim Crow era. I've been exposed to bad education. I mean, just a whole host of issues that impact the Black life has been my lived experience. So naturally, I had an inclination to want to change those things. So that's what I've been doing ever since for the last 7-8 years as a director at Freedom Inc. and also recently with Young Gifted and Black as one of the organizers and one of the co-founders of the group. And so my work is really around ending violence within and against the Black community. Here, we have a very special moment, very special historical moment, where many people around the country are talking about the violence, particularly state violence against the Black community. And so Young Gifted and Black, Freedom Inc., and other folks that I do work with are engaged in a movement to end that state violence against the Black community. So currently, we have two campaigns. We have the Build the People, Not the Jail, hence the t-shirt. And tonight at 5, you should all come out. 6, you should all come out to the Personnel Finance Committee, where we'll be actively working to end racial disparities within the jail systems and the criminal justice system. And we are also working on a campaign called Justice for Tony.
Well, some of you know me and some of you don't. I've been around off and on for over 47 years. I came to Madison at the end of 1972. served as the chief of police here for 21 years. Retired in early in 1993 and went off to seminary in the Episcopal Church and have been almost 20 years now an ordained priest in the Episcopal Church. But I think that my lived experience is such that justice has been pretty much an important part of my life growing up. Even though I'm a privileged white male, I do strongly believe that democracy only works when it works for everyone, and not just for a few. So I find myself about 5 years ago being drawn back into taking a look at police, being a police pundit, being a commentator, and writing a blog and writing a book, because I just happen to very deeply, in the deepest part of my soul, believe police can be so much better, can be such an important catalyst in a community, for a community that seeks justice. And I believe that police can fulfill that role. If I'm wrong, I'll go to my grave believing that, because I still think I'm right. I still think police can matter and make a big difference in improving the community. And I guess I look at them as sort of social workers in blue. That my idea of community policing down to the neighborhood level means, a deep, intimate, collaborative relationship between police and the community to help citizens define the problems that they have and to work with them to overcome those problems. So, in a nutshell, that's about it. My wife and I, my wife's a retired police officer as well. She worked in the Capitol Police for many years. She's been a big consultant to me. She keeps me from doing too many crazy things.
Well, thank you both for being here. I wanted to start with you, Mr. Reverend Cooper, about just to talk a little brief about the sort of a snapshot of what's happening on a national level. And for full disclosure, I'm an immigrant. I've been in this country for about 15 years now. And the image of U.S. outside of U.S. is very different. And then a recent immigrant, you start developing some aha moments of oh, this is not what I thought coming from my country, or this is very different than what I thought coming from my country, and this is the opposite that I thought coming from my country. In specific in regards to human rights, violence against certain groups, violence against Black folks, racial disparities. So can you talk a little bit about what is this that some people talk about a trend, and I don't like that word necessarily, but it's definitely an epidemic all over the country that perhaps some of us that just woken up to one day seeing this news headlines on a national level. Can you speak a little bit about that?
Well, I think it started with Ferguson. He started kind of waking up a little bit, and as this what has been an inner city phenomenon for many years now appears to be a suburban problem. And then shortly after Ferguson, when a few of us were talking about, well, this isn't just about Ferguson, this sounds like it's just about America, because if you look at the outer ring of a lot of our American cities, where you have more of an integrated police department, you often will find that in the suburbs. So Ferguson had that situation of getting involved in having a community that was policed by people who didn't look like the majority of the people in the community. And then the New York Times, shortly after Ferguson, did a study of just what I was talking about. I said, let's look at other suburban areas. They found out in the major metropolitan areas around the country, this was, in fact, the situation. And I think, one of the quotes I remember coming out of the civil rights investigation of Ferguson was this business about ticketing and arresting the Black community and going into court and sort of driving revenue and also driving the criminal justice system. Their statement was this: the Ferguson community, the police, the government, came to see African American residents in the city as sources of revenue rather than to be people served. Now that term, sources of revenue, just reverberated in my soul so deep, because because that's what the slavery system is all about.
Right.
You know, here we are, how many years beyond, we're running into the same kinds of problems. So, and it isn't just an American problem, because many of my colleagues overseas are asking those kinds of questions. Just today, it turns out that the United States must every 4 years sort of recommit its civil rights activities to the UN. And we're in that process right now, and some people in Geneva are asking questions about our racial policies. And when we compare other democratic countries with our country, they don't shoot as many people as we do. Remarkably different. So it's that attitude, there's that law of guns certainly plays a role here, and I would hope that in the next few months that we start having a serious discussion about guns in America. And that's kind of that overview as I see. It's a crisis. People tend to want to deny this, but we are in the midst of a major crisis in democratic policing in our country. And how we emerge from this, we can take two roads. We can reform police, and we can have a better police, and we can have the kind of police that I'm talking about, or we leave police alone and they take the other road, which is increased militarization, increased distance between you, your community, and the police, and sort of a bunker mentality. And it's really easy to do that. There's examples of that all over the world, except they're not called democracies. They're called third world autocratic countries.
I'm very familiar with those, and we'll touch more on that. So just want to hear from you, and I know you've been in touch with things and what's happening at international level, and you had said you've been like also very impacted by those issues. What is your analysis on that?
So I agree that we are in a crisis, but the crisis that we have isn't a policing crisis. The police are actually fine. They're not being killed once every 28 hours. They're relatively safe. They get paid. They tend to have houses. I mean, so the issue isn't about police and police safety. The crisis then is in the black community. The black community is being killed once every 28 hours, locked up massively, or are experiencing mass incarceration, homelessness, bad education, and a host of other issues. And given that the black community is having a crisis, we have to develop solutions that are really going to bring the black community out of that crisis. We have to develop human rights solutions that are going to bring the black community out of that crisis. To speak just for a second about why this moment is big and why this moment is significant, it is not that black people all of a sudden are killed by the police.
Right.
That's always been happening since the police have been developed and the inception of the police. It is that we currently have a social movement that is resisting the violence of the police. So we know Ferguson, we know Michael Brown, not because we knew him personally or because he's more important than some person in the middle of Nebraska or some other place in this kid. We know him because people engaged in a social movement and in urban rebellion. And so the group of social movements referred to the Black Lives Matter movement is why we know this moment. And so we actually, what's happening nationally is what you described, is that the police are becoming more militarized. The police are continuing to act out violence, but there is a group of people on the ground who are actively resisting that in the Black Lives Matter movement, which creates the moment that we're in where deep transformation can actually happen. The transformation won't happen by us just sitting around and hoping. The transformation, any change that we're going to see is going to happen based on people being in the streets and using direct action as a form to force radical change. And we need deep radical change in order to stop the crisis. You cannot put a Band-Aid on the crisis. You need deep radical social transformation to address the crisis, which is why I am calling for, or we are calling for, community control over police.
This is going to be the thing that's coming next, but I want to bring us to ground us in the local level because some of you know I do work with a lot of different schools in Dade County, and I remember 4 or 5 years ago when I would be sort of introducing the concept of school prison pipeline or talking about school prison pipeline, and folks would be saying, this is smart educators, folks in the community, and folks would be saying, these are things that happen in New York, in LA, in Oakland, and now it seems like, oh, it's happening here, right? So, and that sort of awakening of happening here, I think took sort of this other role or more transparent after the waste to Applegate report, and most recently with the death of and the murder of Tony Robinson. So, Reverend Cooper, can you bring us to the local level? What is happening in our good county, county full of very committed, liberal, progressive folks that often do not reflect even what's happening in the rest of the state. We have a history of being very progressive with our policies, the way we do things. What is going on? What is happening here?
Good question. I don't have a lot of contact with the department. I know they read my blogs, and I know that there's some anger around that, but I do.
I'm angry with you.
I do stress that this is a national problem, and sort of if the shoe fits where it is. There's no doubt that Madison Police Department has a strong and long tradition of community services. So this is probably as much a shock to me as anyone else. I think I got involved about a year and a half ago with the Pauline Heenan shooting on the side. As to whether or not that was policy, we got into an argument during those days about a Supreme Court decision called Graham v. Connor, which the U.S. Supreme Court in 1989 said that the standard for using deadly force by a police can be seen to be objectively reasonable, and that is that essentially experts were not to be brought into these cases to say that this was right or wrong, but how did the officer feel threatened by a person, whether that person was armed or unarmed. And that is really the crux of the decision right now as to whether or not this community will stand for a standard that says that it is in the minds of the officers to whether or not they fear that they might be in danger. It's a very, very low standard. I don't think that a police officer who feels that his or her life is in danger and uses deadly force should necessarily have to go to jail for that. That's really the court's decision. But the question the community can ask is whether or not that person should be a police officer in a police department. And that's the higher standard. What has happened in many major cities because of Graham v. Connor, and was just recently noted by a Justice Department investigation in Philadelphia, was basically interpreted by police officers to be, I fear, therefore I can shoot. Well, I'll tell you, 10 years of my 33-year career, I was a street officer in a tactical squad and all kinds of situations. I can tell you that I feared a lot. But, and in 10 years, I think our tactical unit probably ended up probably taking less than 3 or 4 lives, and each one of those was involved in a firefight. That is, the person fired at the officer, and the officer returned fire. So the standard has somehow changed. I say, well, how did this happen? Well, my theory is it goes back to 9/11. So a nation of fear of terrorism, fear of the other, fear of difference that went on at that time, and then a slow sort of deterioration about tactics. There was something called the 21-foot rule that was subsequently being challenged. But police officers have been taught this for about the last almost 30 years, and that is if a person with an edged weapon is within 21 feet of you, that person can charge and kill you before you can discharge your firearm. But it says nothing about taking cover or standing out of the way or anything other. So that kind of heightened. I also pay attention to the police blogs out there. Well, I'll tell you, the response on the police side is all kinds of videos about police officers being shot, stabbed, choked, bitten by dogs. They pop up on the internet in the police blogs time and time again. what needs to change is something that I think, I don't know, 40 years ago, shortly after Dr. King was assassinated, I was a foot patrol officer in an all-black community in Minneapolis. I determined very quickly that closer is safer. If I was to distance myself from the community that I was to service there, I would be putting myself in danger because they wouldn't know me. They wouldn't know what I was trying to bring to the community. And we brought that same theory into Madison in dealing with protest, with the student protest movement back in the 70s. That the closer the officers were, non-militarized, wearing blazers, working very intimately with those protests, and it turned out without having a lot of problems. I don't think we ever had one in 21 years ever going on. But it's a certain way of seeing things. It's a way of seeing people. It's a way of seeing your job. And the people aren't the enemy. You know, that's not the enemy. Everybody wants, even the poorest of the poor neighborhoods, want a sense of peace in the neighborhoods. They want to see their kids grow up without drugs and without gangs and guns around. They just want to get on with their lives. And that's what police can help people do, and not have to work against the community, but in fact with and for the community.
I have a very direct question, if you can just be really brief on this really important question. Do you think there's hope for reform for police, especially using the context you mentioned about othering, which I don't think it's going back, would not become the last othering, I think it becomes more othering. Is there hope?
Well, I have hope. I have hope, and my belief is that this is the community. I mean, every other community seems to be frozen around America now. What to do? Baltimore doesn't know what to do. Ferguson doesn't know what to do. New York is doing some things.
Do we know what to do?
I do.
Well, I think so. And that's enough.
doesn't have to do with
We
the
decide
police.
on that.
Let's just hear about that a little bit. And do you mind just taking off from what?
Could I just finish up on that?
Yes.
What needs to be, this community, if it gets together with the resources we have, with the heart sense that this community has, we can be the model that can show other people how to move beyond this. That's my hope. That's my hope. That we would learn how to do it here, and then we would export it. And that's what we did for the police department, our community policing years. We exported to other communities. Come on, see how we do it. We do it this way in Madison. You can learn it too. That's my hope for this community, whichever way we go.
Yeah, do you want to talk a little bit about what Reverend Cooper just mentioned, and just also in regards to what's going on at a local level, how the liberal, progressive Dane County becomes now this county that people are just, I mean, like my father is heard about Dane County, like he didn't even know what it was. So it's reaching international news as well.
So I do have hope and a vision that we could create a new world. I absolutely believe that, and my work is based on that, based on the fact that we the people can win and create the better world for ourselves, our grandparents, and our children. I think in order to do that, we have to fully understand what the issues are and build solutions that directly address the fullness and the depth of those issues and not the surface issues. So I think absolutely there are a number of issues happening with police, but I do not think reforming the police will address the root issue that is happening.
That's right.
So I think that we've seen in the history of the United States some very important and amazing organizing work that has abolished some of the worst institutions imaginable. We have seen abolition movements abolish chattel slavery.
Yeah.
We have seen the civil rights movements and other movements abolish Jim Crow and related segregationist institutions. The problem, though, is that the problem isn't if we can have the power to outgrow the bad thing. The question is, what do we replace it with? So because we didn't fully address the depth of the problems at the time, other institutions were able to spring back up that were able to act violently towards the black community and further disenfranchise and oppress.
That's right.
And so many other things.
That's right.
That's what we cannot afford here at policing. We cannot build a social movement that only says, well, next time the police officer calls for that. And maybe that would be short-sighted of what the root issue is.
That's
What
right.
the root issue is a issue of power. So yes, the police do kill white people in other communities. That's absolutely true. What you don't see though is that they are not killing white people at the same rate as black people. So the issue is much, in my mind, the issue is much deeper than a question of fear. Because I imagine if a police officer is at this drunk white college party and they burn his shirts, that could be pretty scary. But what doesn't turn out there is that they don't shoot down all of these white college kids who are standing fire in shirts.
That's right.
So the issue is not just fear. The issue is not just fear. And the converse, if the issue is just fear, black people are scared of police. You don't see black people gunning down police officers. The difference is the power.
Come on now.
As you mentioned earlier, Reverend, about it being the police officer being a militant force, about becoming increasingly militarized. Other things, the police are acting as an occupying force in the black community. That is at the root of what the issue is. And if we're going to end or solve the question of police murders and so many other police issues or police injustices, then we have to fundamentally solve the issue of power and the power difference between the police department and the black community, which is why we are calling for community control of police. You're absolutely right. The closer the police are, or the closer any institution is to the community, the safer it is. The safest option then must be the police must be in and of and from that community.
Yes.
If the police officers live in that community, that immediately solves that particular issue, which is the first component of community control of police. The second is that the community, like you said, should have the right to hire and fire that officer. Had they had the opportunity, Darren Wilson probably wouldn't have had the job.
Right.
And Michael Brown would still be alive. It would say, no, actually, you're not from here, and we don't know how you get down. Not a good fit. 3, the community should be able to determine the priorities of the police and also the policies and the practices of the police. If we implement full community control of the police, which is community members are truly practicing democracy, that's what that would mean. It would mean that the police are accountable to the community.
Right.
Then you can enact accountability measures that will actually work. Then the communities can determine safety. Then they could have really heard, no, we actually don't want you to kill Tony Robinson.
Right. Yes.
We actually just want him to go to the hospital.
Yes.
And maybe get, I don't know, IV or whatever they give for people. But that is what we need to ultimately address this. If not, we are 40 years from now going to be having this conversation, just like 40, 50 years now we're having the conversation, even though we were able to abolish the system. We are still facing the disparities. We'd be having the same conversation 40, 50 years from now because we haven't fundamentally solved the issue of black power.
That's right.
This would be a good time if folks have questions. If you can just bring them here to me on the side, I can start looking at them. But yes.
Will one of you, Eric, will one of you collect the questions?
I think it's what they're trying to avoid.
Right?
So Eric, can you talk a little bit more about what would be control? I mean, if you kind of are going to share some insights, what does it look like? What is it like if you were to, if someone, if tomorrow said, okay, now community is going to control the police, what does that look like?
So somehow we would have to figure out districts or areas that would have policing units. Whatever that means is relevant to that community. Milwaukee, it looks like you divide up 4 or 8 quadrants. In Madison, it could be 3 or 12. We'd have to, as a community, decide what are the relevant areas to draw the lines to determine what communities or what policing units are assigned to different areas. And then you'd have to go through a process of hiring people from that community who would become the police officers. You'd have to have some level or standard of training, and that community would determine the policies, practices, and procedures. And so I think what I would propose, and once again, I think this should be a democratic process. So it can't just be me all saying what it should be. It would have to really come from the community.
Right.
But as proposed in the 70s by the Black Panthers and other folks who have been working on it, is you would have each community or each policing area district would have a review, would have a board of 12 people who lived in that community. That would be the governing board or body of the police. And so that's what it would look like. So you would wake up the next day and you would have a community meeting. 12 people would be randomly selected, much like a jury is randomly selected. 12 people would be randomly selected to serve on this governing board. They would, you'd go through a hiring process. Based on the community, the folks would have to be trained, and you would determine the policies, practices, and procedures of the police. So policing would be completely localized and under complete democratic control. And community control of policing would radically transform how we understand policing also. So you would, this idea that these are scary people who got a gun, that idea would go away, because it wouldn't do that to your neighbor who you would have to keep safe, or yourself.
It's really interesting. Now, Reverend Cooper, I know you have some thoughts on this, and if you can tie in, I know you wrote some, a lot of pieces actually about community policing, which has been sort of a word that became like a word that's loosely sometimes defined based on whoever's saying, and also neighborhood policing and what that was. Because I know my neighborhood officers,
Sure.
but that is not the model that happens in all communities. Can you talk a little bit about that and how you would?
But a lot of what I'm saying could be implemented, even within certain structures. The city could have each one of the police districts such a board that would tend to be a little bit more hands-on than, say, the police and fire commission. But the problem is when you talk, and I talked around in various places about this with the white folks, with the haves, okay? When I talk about any of this stuff, the haves kind of get puzzled with that. I mean, they're kind of nice, decent people, but they don't get it. They don't get it. And somehow, if we're gonna be successful with this, we have to get the majority of the community here to get this, that is in everybody's interest, such a system that is more responsive to community needs. Because what will happen is, if you talk to a more conservative person in the community, he'll say, well, we elected the mayor, and we elected the common council here, and we got this public safety review board here, the mayor appoints, and we got this police and fire commission that the mayor appoints. And
That's their role, to carry the message.
yeah, that's what they do, and what's the problem?
Tony Robbins.
What we're talking about is a much closer kind of relationship, a give and take. The model is really the neighborhood officers that we started to put into the community a number of years ago. That work, one officer, one area, very much involved, meeting with community residents, finding what the problems are, working. That's kind of the basic model right there. When you get away from that model into allowing police to police an area by time of day rather than geography, then you get into trouble. And the success of a neighborhood officer is he or she is responsible for everything that happens there 24/7, every day, and there's no shifts and there's no people coming back and forth. That's the key point. And if he or she needs resources, then they get that. But we've got the start of that here, and we could magnify that. I guess one thing I said when I was thinking about retiring, I wish I had said, well, we're going to have 50 neighborhoods of these. We're going to have 80 of them. We're going to have every little part of the city broken up. But of course, hindsight is better.
Quickly. So the issue that I have with that is two. One, I should name that the haves actually have community control.
Right?
As a class, Afro communities and white communities, not necessarily individually, but they already have community control over police. They do. And so really what we're talking about and what they don't buy into isn't community control. They don't buy into it for black people.
That's right.
So we should talk about it like that.
Yeah.
We should, because we're not having a conversation about whether white or affluent communities should have neighborhood police. They don't have them. There's no person over there lurking around in a blazer, like, what you doing? It doesn't happen. See, right? Sounds ridiculous, doesn't it? But see, it's not happening. And so really we're talking about black communities. And so the question is, does the black community want this neighborhood policing? Does the black community want this model community policing? And I think the overwhelming or the majority answer is no. Because whether or not this person's wearing a blazer, they don't live here, we want somebody from here. Just like affluent communities have people who are of that community. The same sorts of things that the black community is saying. So community, that model is only going to work if the community wants it. And the community does not want police just hanging out there. Much like affluent communities don't have it. So I don't want the police at my park. Nope. If the police aren't at the other people's parks, why do we have to be that way?
So this was a question that I asked. This was a question that I asked at the mayoral, when I had the mayoral candidates regarding what people were saying that happens, right, with police officers and other folks say that it's happened. And then what communities really receive that it's happened. So again, full disclosure, like I have had my apartment raided before and have got interrogated, very intimidated by officers before. But I also had people that I admire, there are officers. It's really conflicting sometimes, right? To think of like, okay, all police are bad, or all police in the community are bad. But I also live like just down the street from here, and I have lived in different parts of the city, and I have not experienced so many police as I've experienced on the south side.
Right.
So how is that, how do you internalize that and rationalize that in a way that is different than what reality is, which is you see overrepresentation of black folks and people of color going to the juvenile justice system at a higher rate and going to the adult system at a higher rate. How do you reconcile those two pieces?
Well, like I said, this is about power.
It's about race too, right? And we're talking about race too, right?
We're talking about power, we're talking about race, yeah. And we're talking about, I think, the fact that, as I look back, one of the things that I think, even when I was working, I thought I was pretty open, I had a good view of things, but, I had my blinders on. Now, some 20 years out and taking a look at this, I don't think I've got as many blinders on as I have. What we have in America today is whether or not we can change this, the issue, and that is we have a system of domination. The system of domination is the people that have use the police to make sure that they keep having what they have and keep the have-nots from bothering the haves.
Yeah.
And you could base that certainly on class, economic class also is also based on race. So how do we change that? Well, first of all, I've been trying to preach to the police that they've got to see themselves as part of that domination system.
So part of the problem.
Part of the problem is being able to see themselves, and what can we do to lessen that, and to certainly, so just circles around what you're saying is that the connection between the police and the community must be just ratcheted up tenfold.
But Chief Cobal has said publicly a few times that he's not changing the procedures and the procedures are fine. Is it right?
Yeah, that's right.
So
That's what he said.
how do we get to that place without?
Well, I think what we're talking about, and I guess maybe why police are having trouble understanding me is that they say we've got this policy, we've had this policy since the 70s. The policy hasn't changed, by the way. But what's changed is the training, and what's changed is the attitude. And it's just going to be hard to do that. I thought we had an attitude that the life is sacred, that life is something to be protected. I worked with officers that were involved in shoot. They tended to bother me. I'll tell you this right off. I was afraid that they'd either shoot too soon or they wouldn't shoot at all, and that they would put me in danger. And I think that the police that are involved in shootings, and I think this is my anecdotal kind of experiential thing, is that it really changes their life. And it changes their life not for the better in terms of relationships, in terms of the family, and so many things. So it would be something that police would want to avoid at all costs. And to certainly not to ever jump in and take a life if you could possibly. I don't know if you saw that video last week or so of a young rookie officer, a person who wanted to be, as the vernacular is, a suicide by cop. Kept on coming out to this officer. You don't want to shoot anybody. Just get back. I don't want to shoot you. Get back.
But note that the person was white, right? The person that was coming after.
Oh, I don't know. Was it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was white. So I think.
Well, I'd like to see the other video there too.
Yeah.
That would be a good one. Because that's one of the things about, about unconscious bias. I mean, we white folks have to really understand that. And white police have to understand that. Is that we come out of a racist society here. We are imprinted with this thing, and it's our job, if we're in positions of authority and have the ability to use deadly force, must recognize that and be able to ratchet through that. Oh, black guy running with a computer. Old guy, or is it college student going through? So that goes through, but can you put that back? Can you push that back and say, that's not going to drive my decision? And that's two separate societies, one black, one white, separate and equal, separate and unequal, 1968 Carter Commission. 1968. And we can say the same thing for our society today. We've got to start doing something. Whatever it is, we've got to fix it.
I know you and I have certain other times when we talk about the implicit bias and the flaws of any terminology in regards to racial justice or limitation, I guess, not necessarily flaws. But can you talk a little bit about this? That the difference between the response when it's towards a white person versus towards a black person.
Yeah, so they're killing black people at far higher rates. They're jailing black people at far higher rates. They're giving citations, ticketing, the contact, what happens in the contact. There's probably less contact between the two communities. There's less contact in the white community, I'm sure, than the black community, and the results of that contact have huge disparities. So there's no question in my mind that race is a motivating factor here. There's no question that people must have some racial prejudice, racial bias, and even if they don't, there's no question that it's still playing out or acting out. The reason why I don't like to focus very much on asking those sorts of individual questions, like did the officer mean it? You can't, look, you can spend all your time trying to prove that somebody meant to do something or whether or not they're a good person. Well, what I want to talk about is the impact. It doesn't matter how nice the police are if the arrest rate disparities are better than black. We're going to say, oh, yeah, they did arrest 11 times more black people, but at least they're nice. And at least they were nicely arrested. I mean, I think too often when it's uncomfortable to have these conversations about impact, we go back to intent and hope that people mean well. But us black people, we don't get to live in intent. Our reality is an impact. And the problem is people want to stay in intent. And so while we may want the existing police to do well, frankly, if you're scared of black people, you should not police black communities.
Point blank.
Just kidding. I mean, can you imagine if me and YGB, we became police officers tomorrow, and we're going to police Maple Bluff? We're scared. Like, we're scared, right? For real reason, real caution. We're scared because there's some party at somebody's big house, and they got drunk, and we just shot up the house. That sounds unreasonable, that sounds ridiculous, but that's what people are asking the black community to tolerate.
That's right.
People are asking us to hold back, allow the murders for once every 28 hours until we out-bias the white people. We can't do that. We cannot do that.
So I've written this in my blog for about the last, ever since February. And the basic thing is, I think, and I might be assuming here, I think the call from the black community to the police is, stop the killing. That's the basic step.
Pretty clear.
Okay?
Let's do that.
Basic step, stop the killing. And what I've said to police leaders throughout the country is, you've got to be able to answer that question. You've got to be able to answer the question in an honest and believable way what you're going to do as a police leader to stop the killing. Because, well, just on New York Times Magazine this Sunday, big black cover, white letters, it's simple, stop the killing. Is that what it said? It's simple, just stop the killing.
So
So that would be a good first step.
Racist?
You're a good person. Let's go with that. Stop
Is
shooting black
that what we're talking about? Is Madison police racist?
Look, if your policies go back to the 70s or your whatever, first of all, 1970 wasn't a great decade for black people.
It was
So
not.
this like idea that, well, these are the same policies you had since the 70s. This is the same policy you had after 3 years after Jim Crow. I mean, what?
What are we talking about?
No, the black, Madison wasn't, I can't name a year where Madison was great to black people. I can name years where Madison was flourishing for the white community, where there was probably a boom or a wave of white people coming in and adding to the university and the economy boom. But I cannot point to a decade where I can say, yeah, that's the decade where Madison was great toward black people. So if you're priding yourself on the 70s or any other decade and saying these policies hold up from this decade, I'm going to say that decade was racist toward black people, and that decade also probably had very similar disparities. So yes, so if you are acting the way you've always acted, yes, you're racist, because the way the police have always behaved was with structural racism.
Come on now.
That's right.
Well, you'd have to ask, it is a systemic problem, it's a domination system problem, because of 20 of those years, you had a black man as the chief of the.
Yes.
No, no.
So you're talking about the same situation that's happening in Baltimore right now. You've got a black mayor, you've got a black police chief, you've got a significant black number of officers on the police department, and yet the system is producing as if it wasn't black.
So we agree that it's a systemic racism.
Yes.
Oh, absolutely.
And is it also racist?
Well,
You cannot be
I'm just reading the question.
Structural racism is a form of racism. You cannot be structurally, have a system of structural racism and say that that system isn't racist. That's not true. Yes, it is racist. I don't understand.
This is what I'm
well,
trying to become.
let me quote a very popular figure. Racism and violence in America is just like apple pie.
Cherry,
Right?
cherry,
Who said that?
Rap Brown, cherry pie.
So the old guys, we go through
Get your quote right
We've inherited a lot of this. Yes, yeah. There's, a whole lot of changes that need to be made, and I'm still hopeful that this would be the place where we can do that. It's going to take, these kind of honest, eyeball-to-eyeball discussions, and the police are going to have to be vulnerable. They're going to have to be, the only, what Brene Brown said, the only real personal growth in your life is through vulnerability. So if you can't be vulnerable, you ain't going to grow.
And they should give away their
It's hard
guns.
for institutions to be vulnerable.
Can't be vulnerable with a gun in
So
their
I'm
pocket.
gonna take my place of privilege here because I see a lot of news here, mainstream news here, which is not often the case, or never the case.
Ever.
And I wanted to speak publicly and invite both of you, myself, and Chief Koval to have a conversation. Would you come to this space?
You should talk to me about this before you just said that.
Would you come to the space of vulnerability that you mentioned, Reverend Cooper, with the chief so we can have a conversation?
Well, I should, I heard.
So you say yes?
I would hope you want to meet.
Dialogue implies that there is a horizontal relationship
Yeah,
between
that's
you
right.
participating. There's not a horizontal relationship between myself and
That's right.
Chief Koval. It's
Yep.
not a personal critique. I don't know him personally. He probably would be very nice to me. Because I don't know him personally. But what I do know is that there is a huge power differential, and what could result so therefore the result of that conversation doesn't seem fruitful for myself. And so I think, what would we talk about? Let me with different things.
Well, there's plenty of questions here.
But I think that, but I say that to say, I think I thank you for asking that question, because once again, we try to do this very personal thing and say, well, maybe if we have a conversation, I'm sure Chief Koval has black friends.
Yes.
Right? So this is another conversation necessarily with the black person. So do I think the conversation would create a change that's going to stop the killing of black people? No. So I don't see what the,
I think it's always worth it. I mean, when I think about, I think a lot about South Africa. I was down there in Angela in '99. A chance to listen to Nelson Mandela speak and Desmond Tutu. I mean, Mandela took that chance.
So
I mean, there's always a possibility. I mean, you get shut down, you get shut down. I mean, you're not going to be in any danger. I'll protect you, I promise. But no, I mean, there's a chance for us to have this conversation.
so
You need to hear what you're saying.
Mandela has far more power than I do now. If I had the power of Mandela, the movement would be in a very good position.
Someday,
So I think it's important to understand. So when this truth and reconciliation process that you talk about happened after the shift of power happened, what's being asked of me to be clear is to have the conversation during the time where Mandela was protesting, before he grew to this famous person that we all love and adore and who we now support. That is not the case. I do not have the level of power where it would be a horizontal conversation happening between myself and you. It just doesn't. It just doesn't exist. I would love to have that much power, but it just doesn't. There wouldn't be a horizontal conversation, and therefore the results of what could come out of that conversation wouldn't necessarily further my community. But what I will say is we can talk more about this later.
We'll take that. I want to shift us a little bit because last night I received the note that the decision from the DA is coming probably within the next 24 hours. And I've talked to a lot of people already. There's a lot of feelings both ways, and I know that the community's been expecting this decision for quite some time, and there's a lot of emotions about it. So I don't know, Em, do you want to go first and kind of talk a little bit about the YPD position? What are some of your thoughts? What are some of the hesitations? What's happened this week in your world?
We don't have any hesitations. Our work is the same as it was when we set out in November. We had a deep understanding of what the issues were. Our analysis remains the same. Unfortunately, we are dealing with the materializing of police injustices here through the murder of Tony Robinson. But our work is still the same. YGB is still committed to using direct action, positive action, as a way to force the radical change and radical transformation that needs to happen. YGB is not leading or coordinating any of the actions or events happening on Tuesday. So happening on the actual day of what we know to be a non-indictment. What we are going to do is to resume our actions on Wednesday, starting our Black Spring offensive, which is a national call for folks in the Black Lives Matter movement or organizing for Black liberation around the country to do a sort of paralleling it to Arab Spring. So we are going to be launching our Black Spring starting Wednesday. So our work is still the same. Our message is still the same. We still understand the root causes of the issues the same, and we'll continue our work Wednesday.
Can you talk a little bit? I know some of the members have publicly mentioned about the blood in the street, and blood will be in your hands, and I know it means different things. I'm reading questions. Later. Can you, because I hear that and I hear different, but I can hear also that other people may perceive that to be very different. Or I know that you all have been getting a lot of questions about violence and escalation of violence. Can you talk about those two things?
Very briefly, but I should mention that Monday, Brandy, you want to read the details? Monday, we're actually doing a panel. Myself, Professor Pam Oliver at the university, and also Will Green.
Yep, you, Will Green, and Professor Pam Oliver, sociology, will be engaging in conversations about violence and social movements historically through the present day. Questions that will be considered include what is violence, what does state violence get framed as normal, while protesters breaking windows is framed as violent and out of line. Do charges of violence and calls for peace maintain the status quo? Do such calls discipline protesters? How have such changes functioned historically? The panel will address these questions and more. It will be facilitated by Sarah McKinnon, and it will be held on the 18th, 7 p.m. on campus.
So we'll have an hour, hour and a half to really answer, totally, yep, next Monday, to really look at the question, the violence keep coming up. What do you think? And especially given light of Baltimore and a non-indictment, facing a non-indictment here. So I do think that the initial statement that you referenced was accurate. I do think that the blood is on the police's hands.
That's right.
That's true. There's no question that the police killed Tony Robinson. They murdered him. And I think we should quit talking about it in neutral terms. He didn't just die, he was killed.
Shot to
So
death.
it is true that his blood is on their hands, and it's also true that the pain and the rage and the grievance and the outcry felt by this city as a result of that is also on the police's hands. I completely and fully agree with the statement. And what does happen to black people is that we often get considered violent. And so if you say something like that, people are going to say, oh, well, you're threatening whoever and so and so. We haven't threatened anybody. We haven't threatened anybody. If anything, they have threatened us several times over. And so that's what I'm saying.
Do you think that's another symptoms of the othering?
Yes, there's no question. When black people resist, that's seen as violent. When the state is constantly acting out violence against our communities, that's considered law and order.
Yep.
Expectations for tomorrow?
You know, I think people have to really deeply go into their hearts and figure out what they're going to do tomorrow. And I think that's what I'd say. This is a major watershed point in Madison and Dane County. Tomorrow will be the day. And I say it'll be the day because no matter what the decision is, it's not going to be good. No matter what the decision. If Officer Kenny is found to have committed a crime, that's a really bad situation for the city of Madison and this police department. And if he is to be exonerated, no one will believe it. Who is a person of color, who has had experience with the system. And from that point, we're going to have to figure out how we're going to live and work together and make this a better community. Just like Abby said, we can't forget the race to equity report, because that's a big part of this whole thing. And it shouldn't all be focused on the police, because this is a community problem. This has to do with how our black children in this community are being educated, how they're being graduated, how jobs are being built, healthcare. All of those things are part of making this a better place for everybody to live. And as Dr. King said years ago, he said, no man or woman is free until all people are free. The work's not done until we can say, hey, guess what? We're all free. Finally, we're all free. We're all free. It's a tough day, and it's a day of reflection, a day of prayer, and for some people, it'll be a day of action.
I want to, do you mind just going a little bit deeper on, because to me, like, you know, I was like, someone died and was murdered. That's really clear to me, regardless of what the decision. But can you explain to me a little bit more, like, what's the difference in your point of view of a decision? You mentioned, like, if he actually committed a crime on the eye of the state or not. Can you talk a little bit about that? And also, what I've seen in the room in this space, and what I've seen a lot in a few of the protests that I attended, a lot of white folks in support of YPD as well. So how does that? Can you talk a little bit?
Well, I think there's a lot of white people who get it. This isn't just a black thing. You know, this is a community.
It's not a black issue.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a human issue. It's a human rights issue. It's a justice issue. It's a righteousness issue. So there's going to be, and what I'm going to say is, there's got to be brought more allies. If the change is going to happen, it can't be just the black folks in Madison because they have no power to make the change. The change is going to happen. It's going to be more white people saying, "I'm an ally. Count me in. I'm part of making all this happen." Because I want a better community for my family, for my kids, for my grandkids. Then stuff happens. we just separate and say, oh, it's those black people again, they're just complaining all the time, we'll go nowhere. And I think this is bigger now. If you don't move to this, if the white community doesn't see that this is who we are as this city, this is who we are in Madison, this is the thing that we say that we're proud about this community, is that we can fix things here, that we can work together, that we can make it better. Yeah, and we just have to do that. If we lose this, it's not going to be a happy road in the coming years.
And can you talk a little bit about this concept of crime? And again, I'm a humanitarian, like I think that anybody, killing anybody it's a crime, regardless of who's doing that, but can you talk a little bit about that?
So, crime is a construct.
Come on now, preach.
Too often when it's discussed, people discuss crime as if though it's this objective or unmovable standard, that it is universally defined, but it's not. And what is terrible is that police are often exempt from, police are held at a lower standard when it comes to how they're supposed to behave. So if I said, now I'm not trained in combat, I have no formal training in combat, I have not gone to a higher level of education to study how to interact with people or do conflict management. I am not trained in weapons. I do not have multiple weapons, and I do not have an entire body or force that would support me in a moment of conflict, and nor do I have the law on my side. I'm vulnerable. If I bust into somebody's house and I said, they hit me in the head, and I shot them multiple times, be no question that I shouldn't have done that. There's no question. They'd be like, that was excessive. You don't have to shoot them that many times. And look, I don't have any training. Now somebody with all of this training, all of this resource, all of this power, all of this backup does the exact same thing, and they're held here. We actually, as the police, expect way less of their behavior in moments of conflict than we expect of the average person. That doesn't make sense. You would expect for a doctor to behave better around somebody's health than you do me. You would expect a teacher to be better at communicating or teaching whatever than me. So why should we expect a police to be far better at managing conflict than me? But that's not what happens here. So crime is a construct. The police will be not charged. And what we see time over and time again is police, all they have to say is they were scared. That's all they have to say. Well, I'm scared too. Is that going to save me? And if it's not, then it's a construct. And in fact, if we were to develop some sort of functional matrix where you could input race, class, gender, and a host of other identities of a person, that would be, and you would like to say that this is the person who did it, this is who it happened to, and you input it in that function, that would be a far more accurate predictor as to what the outcome in terms of crime is going to be versus the actual details of the facts. So if you enter white police officer, appearing straight, middle class to owning class, and you input that in, and you input Tony Robinson, black or multiracial or whatever, low income, you already know, no matter what the facts of that case is, chances are that officer is going to walk scot-free. And we've seen that time in and time again. Even with hours of video footage, multiple angles, witnesses, all different. Tamir Rice, a kid, right? Ayanna Jones, sleep on the couch. Even when the facts are not disputed, police officers still get to walk away because they get to say, I'm scared, I was scared. That's how we know crime is a construct. It's not about actually what happened, it's about who did it to who, and whether or not that person had the right to do that to that person.
So, final words?
Well, I would just say, that you have a right to expect the very best in policing. You have a right to raise that standard. You have a right to demand that your police services are excellent, that your officers are not biased in how they carry out the law, that they're controlled in their use of force, that they're respectful to everybody, that they'll work with the community, and they're honest as can be. That's a basic right for living in a democracy, and you have that right. And as you said, there is a higher standard. I'm talking about the higher standard, and that should be the standard.
And final words?
YGB is pushing and demanding for community control of police. We think that is what needs to happen in order to bring the Black community out of this human rights crisis, to make sure that there is never another Tony Robinson, Ayanna Jones,
That's right.
and many others. And we are also challenging Madison to actually move on the side of justice. Look, Madison, we can't have it both ways. We can't in one breath say our police are doing a fine job, and then in the next sentence talk about the race to equity report.
Yeah.
If we're talking about the race to equity report, we're talking about race to equity in policing. We are talking about racism within the police departments. And if we understand that and know that that is true, then we have to force the change. We can't just be like, oh, but they're doing a good job. They're actually not.
No.
If the numbers are what the numbers are, if the impact is what the impact is, and that is how we should always measure whether or not an institution is affected by its impact and not what they meant to do.
So President Obama called this task force on policing. He put this together very quickly. There's a report out there. There's 60 recommendations involving local and federal policing. That would be a good template to start. Get yourself familiar with those recommendations that apply to a local area, and that every police agency in Dane County should start working on meeting those standards. That's a good start. And it applies to everybody.
Do you want to give your contact information? I sent some things on the server.
Yeah, so I got this blog. I'm more than willing to share there. It's not just for police, it's for something called improvingpolice.wordpress.com. And my email is David C. Cooper, C-O-U-P-E-R, at AOL.com. And I also tweet at the A thing. What's that? B-O-C-O-U-G-A-R. It's kind of a family joke. Bo Cougar. B-O-C-O-U-G-A-R.
Okay. Really, my last thing was and also support direct action. We cannot revere and honor Martin Luther King, but be against the Martin Luther Kings of our time.
All right.
If we are for that mode of action, we have to be for YGB. You cannot come out against direct action and YGB and at the same time have a picture of King and Rosa Parks at your house.
Right.
The two are. But how to get a hold of us? So YGB, Ferguson T.O. Madison, Ferguson T.O. Madison at gmail.com. You can also go to our Facebook, which is YGB Ferguson T.O. Madison, YGB Ferguson T.O. Madison. Our website is ygbcoalition.org, ygbcoalition.org, and Freedom Inc. also shares and links up this information. So you can also go to freedom-inc.org, freedom-inc.org, and we're on Facebook also, Madison Freedom.
And if you would like to be part of our email list, please give us your email and we can keep you updated on all our events and movements.
So I want to say thank you for Church. Thank you so much, Reverend, for opening this space here for us, especially at the last minute. I want to say thank you, everyone. One moment, please. Thank you, everyone that participated, and also for all your questions. I tried to, as much as possible, tailor the questions to some themes. What I think what I'm going to do is, if it's okay for folks, if it's not, please come and see me. I'll just write the questions on the Facebook page, on our Communities United Facebook page, and then you both can see it, and then other people can see it, and have some comments or threat comments or whatever. I wanted to see if there is any announcements of events that people would like to announce. Yes.
YGB, as M had mentioned, we are hosting our events on Wednesday. It's called Blackout Wednesday. We're standing in solidarity with Black Spring, which is a national call to action for all social justice folks who are involved in the movement to take action. So our action will begin at 9 a.m. on Wednesday. We're meeting at Williamson and Street. And then from there, we we will go on to the county court building, which we will hold our own version of the People's Court. So we invite you to take part in that. We also are being given an award that day, but I'm not sure if we're going to make that, which is Wednesday night at 7 p.m. by the Social Justice Center, which we are honored to receive and appreciate that for them recognizing us and the work that we've been doing. And please follow us. We have tons of events, probably 5 to 7 events a week. So if you would like to have a teach-in, to gather some more information or knowledge, or like to host like a living room thing at your own house, we have white allies that will come in and sit with our white folks because you guys should speak to each other. And that's not being funny either, but because it's necessary for people to connect on a certain level. And you have to have that safe space to say whatever you need to say without feeling like you're going to be judged or critiqued, because we don't want that. We want people to evolve. You know, in order to do that, you have to have those safe spaces. So please reach out to us. If you have any questions, send us the questions. We'll be happy to answer any questions. Thank you so much for your support, and thank you guys for showing up.
And tonight, really quick, tonight, Monday, 6 o'clock, the Personnel and Finance Committee are having a meeting, and we have been, YGB has been very involved in the process of trying to stop a new jail from being built by the county and to stop a lot of money from being put into the jail. So instead, we're trying to get them to commit to doing racial justice in the jail systems. So forcing them to end the racial disparities and to make a plan for how they're going to end the racial disparities. And so a resolution is formed. The resolution is going to go to a vote tonight at the Personnel and Finance Committee. This is a very important meeting, a very important vote, so we encourage folks to come out to that tonight at 5, and there's Wednesday, and then Monday, there's the panel and the discussion about violence or violence in social movements and what does it all mean now?
7 o'clock, the teach-in First Unitarian Church is also tonight. Sorry.
We're busy.
No, First Congregational.
So I do want to say that there is a large group of clergy from a range of states.
Yes.
We plan to respond tomorrow. So I want to correct that the teach-in tonight is First Congregational.
Oh, sorry.
There is a teach-in at First Unitarian Sunday in the afternoon, and then there's one in between somewhere else, and I apologize. St. Dunstan's.
On Saturday at 1.
Etc. So all 3 of those teach-ins, for informational purposes, you can find on the Facebook for Madison Area Urban Ministries, who coordinated that effort, but also, again, hearing YGB is not coordinating something for tomorrow, but the faith community is tomorrow afternoon.
And we
so
are
you
supporting
can
it.
also see the details for that. Madison Area Urban Ministry, go to the Facebook, please, and get the details there and keep abreast of them starting tomorrow afternoon.
Thank you.
Okay, any other announcements? Thank you everyone for being here.
All
We'll have a
powers
meeting
to the
again.
people.
All right.